5 years after 100,000 human children died at Luna Colony, Overlord Dexmar stood in the ruins of his capital city on Vorth Prime. The crystal spires that had reached toward the stars for millennia lay shattered across the burning landscape. Human ships descended through the smoke-filled sky like avenging angels, bringing the final judgment to the heart of the Galactic Empire. The mighty confederation that had ruled half the galaxy for over 1,000 years had not fallen to superior firepower or massive armies. Instead, it had collapsed under its own weight, torn apart by the loss of legitimacy in the eyes of its own people. The Empire's greatest strength, its vast size, had become its greatest weakness when that size could no longer be controlled. Ambassador Hansal Kim stepped from his transport ship wearing the uniform of Earth's Expeditionary Command. The same chamber where he had once declared total war now lay open to the alien sky, its crystal dome shattered by artillery fire. Vorthan guards who had once seemed invincible now knelt in surrender, their crystalline forms dim and cracked. The path to this moment had been longer and more terrible than anyone had imagined. When the Empire launched its great counteroffensive 2 years earlier, it had seemed unstoppable. Millions of Vorthan ships swept across rebel territories, destroying everything in their path. Entire species were wiped out for supporting the human cause, but the Empire's brutality only generated more resistance. For every world they destroyed, 10 more declared independence. The Vorthans found themselves fighting enemies on every front, while their own subjects began turning against them in increasing numbers. Even species that had remained loyal for centuries started questioning whether the Empire deserved their support. A turning point came at the Battle of Centauri Gate, where Admiral Ji-Hai Yun led a combined fleet of humans and 47 allied species against the largest Vorthan armada ever assembled. The battle lasted for 6 days and nights as ships fought and died among the gas giants' rings. When the shooting stopped, the Empire had lost not just a fleet, but the myth of its invincibility. Word of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had been wavering in their loyalty finally chose sides openly. The Vorthan military found itself facing rebellion on its own core worlds as populations that had been oppressed for generations rose up with human-supplied weapons and training. Hansal walked through the captured capital, remembering the diplomat he had been 5 years earlier. That man had believed in compromise and peaceful coexistence. He had thought that understanding between species was possible if everyone just tried hard enough. The massacre at Luna Colony had killed that naive idealism along with 100,000 children. The final assault on Vorth Prime had been surprisingly easy. The planet's defenses had been sabotaged from within by Vorthan civilians who could no longer support their government's policies. Even the crystal beings who had built this empire were not immune to the psychological warfare techniques that humans had perfected. Over 5 years of total war, General Taehyun Kim met Hansal at the entrance to the High Council chambers. The building had been damaged, but the great assembly hall remained intact. Thousands of seats that had once been filled with representatives from across the galaxy now stood empty. Most species had either declared independence or allied themselves with the human-led coalition. The few remaining Empire loyalists huddled together in small groups, looking lost and defeated without their Vorthan masters. Some still insisted that the rebellion would collapse once proper order was restored. Others begged for mercy, claiming they had been forced to support Empire policies against their will. Hansal took his place at the center of the chamber where he had stood 5 years earlier to declare war. The crystal podium still functioned, though its blue glow seemed dimmer now. When he spoke, his words would be transmitted across the galaxy to every world that still possessed communication equipment. The war is over, Hansal announced. The Galactic Empire surrenders unconditionally to the forces of the human Commonwealth and its allied species. All Vorthan military forces will lay down their weapons immediately. All occupied territories are hereby liberated. All species are free to determine their own governments and futures. The formal surrender ceremony was brief and businesslike. There were no grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Overlord Dexmar signed the documents with a hand that shook with age and defeat. His crystal form had lost most of its inner light, making him look ancient and frail. The being who had once commanded the loyalty of 10,000 species was now just another war criminal awaiting trial, but Hansel felt no satisfaction in the moment. The victory had come at a cost that still haunted his dreams. Entire worlds had been devastated by the fighting. Billions had died in the chaos of collapsed governments. Some species had been driven to extinction. During the 5 years of warfare, the children of Luna Colony had been avenged, but their deaths had birthed a conflict that consumed half the galaxy. The trials of Vorthan war criminals began immediately, but Hansel wondered whether justice was truly possible. No punishment could bring back the 100,000 children whose deaths had started this war. The survivors of Luna Colony, now adults, bore emotional scars that would never fully heal. The parents and families of the dead had gotten their revenge, but revenge could not restore what they had lost. Our Soyoung Choi presented evidence of the Empire's crimes to galactic tribunals, but the scope of the atrocities was almost beyond comprehension. Millions of innocent beings had been enslaved, tortured, or killed to maintain Vorthan rule. The massacre at Luna Colony was just one incident in a 1,000-year history of systematic oppression. Many humans questioned whether 2 years after the declaration of total war, the first human fleet emerged from the shadows to engage Empire forces directly. Captain Ji-hai Yoon stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as her squadron approached the Vorthan patrol fleet near Kepler Station. The human ships looked nothing like the vessels in Imperial databases. These were hybrid creations that combined the best features of dozens of different alien technologies. The Retribution itself had been built using Thorgan mining equipment, Zephian energy systems, and Kalari navigation computers. Human engineers had spent months studying captured alien technology and improving upon original designs. The result was a vessel that was faster, stronger, and more maneuverable than anything the Empire had faced before. But the real difference was not in the ships themselves, but in how they were used. Captain Yoon's crew included humans and representatives from 12 different alien species working together with a level of coordination that the Empire had never achieved. Each species contributed their unique strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The Vorthan patrol consisted of 50 ships arranged in the rigid geometric formations that Empire doctrine demanded. Each vessel operated independently, following predetermined patterns that had remained unchanged for centuries. The formation looked impressive and orderly, but it was also predictable and inflexible. Captain Yoon had studied these formations extensively during her time at the Asteroid Command Center. She knew exactly how Empire ships would respond to different threats and had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. Human naval doctrine emphasized teamwork and adaptation over individual heroics. As the human squadron approached Kepler Station, the Vorthan commander demanded their surrender using standard Empire protocols. He offered the humans a chance to avoid destruction by accepting defeat and submitting to Imperial justice. This was how conflicts had been resolved for 1,000 years, smaller forces yielding to superior numbers instead. Captain Yoon activated the communication system that linked all 5 human ships together. The vessels began moving in perfect synchronization, like fingers on a single hand. Each ship knew exactly what the others were doing without needing constant orders. The formation flowed and changed like a living organism, responding instantly to new threats. The battle that followed lasted exactly 17 minutes and became legendary throughout the galaxy. The human ships moved through the Vorthan formation like sharks through a school of fish. Each vessel supported the others in complex, overlapping patterns that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy weapons. The Vorthans tried to respond using their traditional tactics, but their rigid formations became death traps when facing an enemy that refused to follow established rules. Human ships appeared and disappeared using hit-and-run attacks that struck from unexpected angles. Vorthan commanders found themselves shooting at empty space while human vessels materialized behind them. When the battle ended, all 50 Vorthan ships had been destroyed without the human squadron losing a single vessel. The victory was so complete and one-sided that many observers initially refused to believe the reports. Some Empire officials claimed the footage had been fabricated as propaganda, but the wreckage at Kepler Station was very real, and the news spread faster than Empire sensors could contain it across the galaxy. Oppressed species began to believe that the Empire could actually be defeated. The psychological impact was even greater than the military victory. For the first time in centuries, an Empire fleet had been completely annihilated by inferior numbers. General Taehyun Kim watched the battle footage from his expanded command center. On New Sol Colony, the asteroid base had grown into a full military installation with shipyards, manufacturing facilities, and training centers. Hidden throughout the outer systems, dozens of similar bases were producing the weapons and equipment needed for humanity's growing war effort. The victory at Kepler Station was satisfying, but Taehyun knew it was just the beginning. The Empire possessed thousands of fleets and millions of ships. Humanity could not win through military superiority alone. They needed to continue the political and psychological warfare that was tearing the Empire apart from within. Reports from across the galaxy showed that the Shadow War was succeeding beyond all expectations. Over 300 species had declared independence from Empire rule in the past 6 months. Most of these rebellions were led by local leaders who had been trained and equipped by human advisors, but the movements themselves were genuinely indigenous. The Kalari Confederation had become humanity's strongest ally, providing ships, crews, and manufacturing facilities for the war effort. Their worlds served as bases for human operations throughout the galaxy. The Zephian Republic had contributed their advanced medical technology, allowing human forces to save lives that would have been lost in previous conflicts. Even more importantly, dozens of species were forming new alliances with each other, independent of both human and Empire control. The old system that kept different species isolated and dependent on Vorthan authority was breaking down rapidly. Former enemies were discovering common ground and shared interests. The Empire's response grew increasingly desperate as their control continued to erode. Overlord Dexmar ordered massive military campaigns against rebel worlds, but the Vorthan forces found themselves fighting on too many fronts simultaneously. For every rebellion they crushed, 2 more sprang up elsewhere. Some Empire species began switching sides, openly bringing their fleets and resources to the rebel cause. The defection of the Mordic warrior clans provided humanity with experienced military commanders who understood Empire tactics intimately. These alien officers shared their knowledge freely, helping human forces develop even more effective strategies. The war was also changing humanity itself. Colonies that had been peaceful farming settlements were transformed into military-industrial complexes. Earth itself became a massive weapons factory dedicated to producing the tools needed for galactic liberation. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers, developing technologies that neither species could have created alone. Br. So Young Choi established psychological warfare schools on 17 different worlds, teaching alien recruits how to conduct propaganda operations against their former rulers. The techniques developed for the war against the Empire were being adapted by dozens of species for their own liberation struggles, but the rapid expansion of the conflict brought new challenges. Human forces were stretched thin across hundreds of star systems, trying to coordinate resistance movements while fighting conventional battles against Empire fleets. Some operations failed when human advisors were captured or killed, leaving rebel forces without experienced leadership. Captain Yoon found herself promoted to admiral and given command of the growing human fleet. Her victories at Kepler Station and 3 subsequent battles had made her famous throughout the galaxy. Alien volunteers requested assignment to her ships, knowing that service under human command offered the best chance of survival and victory. The human fleet now included vessels from dozens of different species, all working together under unified command. This diversity was both a strength and a weakness. Different species had different fighting styles and cultural approaches to warfare, welding them into an effective fighting force required. Constant diplomacy and adaptation. Intelligence reports indicated that the Empire was preparing a massive counteroffensive designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. Vorthan fleets were being recalled from frontier regions and concentrated at key strategic points. The Empire still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and their traditional advantages in technology and organization. General Taehyun knew that the next phase of the war would determine whether Humanity's gamble would succeed or fail. The easy victories of the Shadow War were ending. Empire forces were adapting to human tactics and developing countermeasures. The time was approaching for a direct confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The memorial garden on New Sol Colony contained 100,000 flowering trees, each planted in honor of a child who died at Luna Colony. The trees had grown rapidly in the alien soil, creating a forest of remembrance that reminded everyone why they fought. Each day, thousands of humans and aliens visited the garden to pay their respects. Admiral Yoon often walked among the trees before major operations, thinking about the children who would never see the galaxy their sacrifice was creating. The memorial was beautiful and peaceful, but it also served as a reminder that some crimes could never be forgiven or forgotten. The Empire had killed those children to break humanity's spirit. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. They had created a species with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant as the final storm of total war approached. 6 months after Hansol Kim's declaration, the Galactic Empire was experiencing what their officials carefully described as minor technical difficulties. Cargo shipments disappeared between star systems. Communication networks suffered mysterious outages that lasted for days. Mining equipment broke down simultaneously across dozens of worlds. The problem seemed random and unconnected, spread across hundreds of systems with no obvious pattern, but Colonel Minjun Lee knew better. From his hidden command center in the asteroid fields of the Kepler system, he watched data streams that told a very different story. The technical difficulties were not random at all. They were the opening moves in humanity's total war against the Empire. Each incident had been carefully planned and executed by human operatives who had spent months infiltrating Empire society. The asteroid base itself was a marvel of human engineering disguised to look like a natural rock formation from the outside inside. The hollowed-out asteroid teams of specialists worked around the clock, coordinating operations across the galaxy. The base had been constructed using materials stolen from Empire supply convoys and powered by fusion reactors reverse-engineered from captured alien technology. Min Jun had been a logistics officer in Earth's military before the war, but total war required new types of thinking. He had studied every conflict in human history, from ancient guerrilla campaigns to modern cyber warfare. The Empire expected conventional military resistance with fleets and armies following predictable patterns. Instead, humanity was fighting a war that followed no rules. The Empire understood the key to humanity's strategy was infiltration. Rather than conquest, human agents had been spreading through Empire space for over a year, posing as refugees, traders, and migrant workers. They looked enough like several humanoid species to blend in when wearing simple disguises. Their ability to learn languages quickly and adapt to alien customs made them nearly invisible among the Empire's diverse population. Dr. So Young Choi led the psychological warfare division from a section of the base that looked more like a university than a military facility. Her team included experts in alien psychology, linguistics, and social dynamics. They had spent months studying each species in the Empire, identifying their fears, desires, and cultural weaknesses. The beauty of humanity's approach was that it used the Empire's own diversity against itself. The Confederation contained thousands of species with different governments, religions, and economic systems. Many had been conquered centuries ago and still harbored resentment against Vorthan rule. Others were recent additions who had joined the Empire reluctantly to avoid destruction. Human agents exploited these divisions with surgical precision on industrial worlds. They organized labor strikes that shut down production facilities. Workers who had been oppressed for generations suddenly found themselves with leaders who understood how to channel their anger into effective resistance. The strikes spread from world to world as news of successful actions inspired others to rebel. On frontier colonies, human operatives encouraged independence movements by providing tactical advice and communication equipment. Isolated settlements that had felt abandoned by the Empire suddenly realized they could survive on their own. Several dozen colonies declared independence in the first 6 months of the war, cutting off valuable resources from Empire supply chains. The merchant species presented a different opportunity. Human economists had analyzed the Empire's trade networks and identified numerous inefficiencies that existed only to benefit Vorthan corporations. When human agents shared this information with alien traders, it sparked outrage and calls for economic reform. Some merchant guilds began refusing to transport Vorthan goods, while others started charging premium rates for their services. But humanity's most effective weapon was generosity rather than destruction. Human agents carried with them technological innovations that improved daily life for ordinary citizens, better medical techniques that could heal previously incurable diseases, more efficient farming methods that doubled crop yields, improved communication devices that allowed families separated by vast distances to stay in touch. These gifts came with no strings attached and no demands for loyalty. Humans simply shared their knowledge freely with anyone who needed it. This generosity stood in stark contrast to the Empire's controlling approach, where every piece of technology was carefully regulated and distributed only to maintain political balance. The Zephian species became humanity's first major ally after human doctors saved thousands of lives during a plague outbreak on their homeworld. The traditional Vorthan response would have been to quarantine the affected areas and let the disease burn itself out. Human medical teams instead developed a cure in days and shared it freely with all affected populations. Similar success stories played out across the galaxy. The Kaleri remembered how humans had helped them negotiate better trade agreements before the war. The Thorgan appreciated human mining innovations that made their dangerous work safer. Dozens of species began to see humans not as rebels but as liberators, who offered real improvements to their lives. The Empire's response was predictably brutal. When Vorthan forces discovered evidence of human infiltration, they retaliated against entire populations suspected of collaboration. Innocent civilians were executed as examples. Whole cities were destroyed to eliminate possible rebel sympathizers. These atrocities only generated more anger and more recruits for the human cause. Colonel Minjun monitored these developments from his command center with mixed emotions. Every Empire atrocity proved that humanity's assessment of Vorthan brutality was correct, but each innocent death also weighed heavily on his conscience. The children of Luna Colony had been avenged many times over, but the cycle of violence seemed to have no end. The most successful human operations targeted the Empire's information networks. Dr. Troy's teams had developed sophisticated propaganda campaigns tailored to each species' specific psychology for warrior races. They created stories about Vorthan cowardice and dishonor for intellectual species. They revealed corruption and incompetence in Empire leadership. For spiritual species, they exposed how Empire policies violated sacred principles. These information campaigns spread through existing communication networks faster than Empire censors could stop them. The messages were designed to seem like local content rather than human propaganda. Each species heard criticisms expressed in their own cultural terms, using their own values and concerns. Within 6 months, the Empire was facing the first serious internal dissent in centuries. Protests erupted on hundreds of worlds as populations that had been quiet for generations suddenly found their voices. Independence movements that had been dormant for decades sprang back to life with new energy and organization. Some species began forming alliances with each other independent of Empire control. The Vorthan leadership tried to dismiss these problems as temporary disruptions caused by a small group of human terrorists, but their own intelligence reports painted a much darker picture. Human operatives seemed to be everywhere, coordinating resistance activities with a level of sophistication that suggested years of preparation. Overlord Dexmar called for increased security measures and harsher penalties for collaboration with human agents, but these policies only made the Empire's subjects more resentful and more likely to support the rebellion. The harder the Vorthans squeezed, the more systems slipped through their fingers. Colonel Minjun received daily reports of new victories and setbacks. The war was spreading beyond anything humanity had originally planned. What had begun as a quest for justice had become a galaxy-wide revolution against authoritarian rule. Species that had never heard of Luna Colony were now fighting for their own freedom using tactics and strategies developed by human advisors. The Asteroid Command Center had grown from a hidden outpost to the nerve center of a galactic resistance movement. Communication arrays reached across thousands of light years, coordinating operations on a scale that boggled the mind. Supply ships disguised as merchant Vessels carried weapons and equipment to rebel forces. Manufacturing facilities hidden in asteroid belts produced the tools of revolution. But Minjin also knew that the easy victories were ending. The Empire was beginning to adapt to human tactics. Security forces were becoming more sophisticated in their counterintelligence efforts. Some human agents had been captured and their identities exposed, putting entire networks at risk. As the shadow war that had begun with sabotage and propaganda was evolving into something larger and more dangerous. Open conflicts were breaking out as rebel forces grew strong enough to challenge Empire military units. The time for hiding in the shadows was ending. The next phase of total war would require humanity to step into the light and face their enemies directly. The 100,000 children of Luna Colony had died believing in peace. Their deaths had created something very different, a galaxy at war with itself, where the old order was crumbling and something new was struggling to be born. The Empire had wanted to teach humanity about power instead. They had learned what happened when humans decided to teach the galaxy about justice. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council had never been more crowded. Representatives from over 10,000 species filled the massive amphitheater that stretched for miles in every direction. The curved walls rose like cliffs toward a domed ceiling that showed holographic images of the galaxy itself. Billions of stars twinkled overhead as if the assembled delegates were floating in space itself. And Sol Kim walked down the central aisle toward the speaking platform, every eye in the chamber followed his movement. The silence was so complete that his footsteps echoed like thunder. Some delegates leaned forward in curiosity, while others shrank back as if humanity's grief might be contagious. The Vorthan representatives sat in their elevated section looking down at Hansol with expressions of bored superiority. At the center of the chamber stood the crystal podium, a piece of technology that would amplify Hansol's words and translate them into every language spoken in the Empire. When he placed his hands on its surface, the podium began to glow with soft blue light. Every being in the chamber would hear his words in their native tongue, and his image would be broadcast to every world. In the Empire, Overlord Dexmar spoke first from his throne high above the assembly. His crystalline form glowed with internal light, and his voice carried the authority of absolute power. The recent police action at Luna Colony was necessary to maintain galactic security, he announced. Human technological development was proceeding at an unsafe rate. The intervention was measured and proportional. Hansol felt rage building inside him as he listened to the lies the Overlord continued speaking about humanity's obligations to the Empire and the importance of following established protocols. He spoke about the children as if they were military targets, as if 10-year-olds learning alien poetry posed a threat to galactic stability. When Dexmar finished speaking, he gestured toward Hansol with one massive crystal arm. The assembly waited to hear humanity's response. They expected apologies and promises of better behavior. They expected Hansol to beg for forgiveness and pledge that Earth would accept tighter restrictions on its development. Instead, Hansol began to speak in a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. I come before this assembly not as a supplicant, but as the representative of a species that has been gravely wronged. The Galactic Empire has committed an act of such evil that it cannot be forgiven or forgotten. 100,000 children died at Luna Colony, not because they threatened anyone, but because their existence represented hope for a better future. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembly. Many delegates had expected Hansol to accept the Empire's explanation and ask for mercy. This direct challenge to Vorthan authority was unprecedented. Some species had objected to Empire policies before, but always in careful diplomatic language that avoided direct confrontation. And Sol continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. These children were not soldiers or weapons researchers. They were students learning about your cultures and your histories. They dreamed of becoming ambassadors and teachers and healers. They wanted to build bridges between species and create understanding where none existed before they died, because the Empire fears what humanity might become. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates realized what they were witnessing. Some species began frantic communications with their home governments, while others demanded that security forces arrest Hansol immediately. The Vorthan section remained ominously quiet, but Their crystal forms began to glow brighter, indicating rising anger. Hansal raised his voice above the tumult. I formally withdraw humanity from all treaties with the Galactic Empire. Earth rejects the authority of this council and declares that we will seek justice for the massacre of our children through any means necessary. The Empire has shown its true nature and humanity will respond. Accordingly, Overlord Dexmar actually laughed at these words. The sound was like crystal bells ringing. In a tomb, your species controls one star system against our 10,000. You have 8 billion people against our trillions. You threaten us with what exactly? Human stubbornness and righteous anger. But Hansal was not finished speaking. He had spent 3 days preparing these words, knowing they might be the last. Diplomatic communication between humanity and the Empire. This is not a threat of conventional warfare, he said. We do not intend to meet your fleets in open battle or conquer your worlds through military force. Instead, Earth declares total war against the Galactic Empire. The phrase total war had no direct translation in most alien languages. The podium system struggled to convey its meaning, settling on concepts like complete commitment and absolute dedication. Hansal explained what humanity meant by total war. Every human resource, every innovation, every capability will be dedicated to the Empire's destruction. We will not rest until every Vorthan world burns. And every species that supported this massacre faces consequences. The implications began to sink in across the chamber. Total war meant that humanity would not be bound by conventional rules of engagement. They would not limit themselves to military targets or respect diplomatic immunity. They would treat the entire empire as their enemy and use any method available to achieve. Victoria Hansal's final words sent shockwaves through the assembly. The war has already begun while you watch this. Diplomatic theater. Human agents have been moving through Empire space for months. We have been gathering intelligence, recruiting allies, and preparing for a conflict. Unlike anything this galaxy has ever seen, the massacre at Luna Colony did not catch us unprepared. It simply confirmed what we already knew about your true nature. Security forces finally began moving toward the podium, but Hansal made no attempt to resist arrest. He had delivered his message, and it was already spreading across the galaxy through thousands of communication channels. Every species would know that humanity had formally declared war on the Empire, and that this war would be fought according to rules that no one fully understood. As Vorthengard surrounded him, Hansal looked up at Overlord Dexmar. One last time, the children of Luna Colony died believing in the possibility of peace between species, he said. They died trusting that the adults who sent them into space would keep them safe. Their deaths have taught humanity a different lesson about the nature of this galaxy. You wanted to break our spirit through fear and brutality. Instead, you have created something far more dangerous. The guards began to escort Hansal from the chamber, but his voice carried clearly through the amplification system. You have awakened humanity's capacity for absolute commitment. We are no longer the hopeful diplomats who joined your empire seeking cooperation. We are now a species with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The galaxy will learn what that means. As Hansal disappeared from view, the chamber remained in chaos. Some delegates were already leaving to return to their homeworlds, while others demanded immediate military action against Earth. The Vorthan leadership tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Word of humanity's declaration was spreading faster than they could contain it across the galaxy. Human agents received coded signals, activating plans that had been months in preparation. Sleeper cells awakened in major cities while sabotage teams moved toward critical infrastructure. The Empire had expected humanity to mourn quietly and accept their reduced status. Instead, they had triggered a conflict that would consume the galaxy. The 100,000 children of Luna Colony had become martyrs to a cause that would transform civilized space forever. Their deaths had awakened something in humanity that the Empire did not understand and could not control. The age of peaceful coexistence was over. The age of total war had begun. Hansal Kim disappeared into the Empire's detention system, but his words continued to echo across 10,000 worlds. Humanity would have its justice no matter the cost. The galaxy would never be the same. The emergency communication reached Hansal at 3 in the morning Nexus prime time. The harsh beeping of his secure transmitter woke him from deep sleep. Hansal stumbled to his communication. Consul, still wearing his sleeping clothes, his heart was already racing because emergency calls from Earth never brought good news, Captain. Eugen Park appeared on the holographic display, but she looked nothing like the confident naval officer. Hansal remembered her face was pale and streaked with tears. Her uniform was torn and stained with something dark. Her hands shook as she tried to compose herself to deliver her. "Report, Ambassador, the Luna colony is gone," Eugen said in a voice that barely held together. The Fourth and Third Fleet arrived. Without warning, 6 hours ago, they opened fire on the civilian settlements. The educational complex where all the children were staying was their primary target, and Saul felt the world tilt around him. 100,000 children from every nation on Earth had been attending the Interplanetary Education Summit on Luna Colony. These were Earth's brightest young minds, selected through rigorous testing and interviews. They were supposed to be learning alien languages and customs, preparing to become humanity's future ambassadors to the galaxy. The children ranged in age from 10 to 16 years old. They came from Seoul and New York, from Lagos and London, from Mumbai and Mexico City. Every culture and nationality was represented in that group. They were living proof that humanity could unite despite their differences. They were the hope for a better future, Captain. Park continued her report with mechanical precision, as if focusing on details could help her avoid thinking about the larger horror. The Vorthan ships used plasma bombardment cannons designed for destroying military installations. The children's dormitories were vaporized in seconds. There were no survivors from the educational complex. Ansal sank into his chair. As the full meaning hit him, the Empire had not just killed children. They had specifically targeted the most promising members of humanity's next generation. They had studied Earth's population and identified exactly which deaths would cause the most psychological damage. The attack made no military sense whatsoever. Luna Colony had no weapons, no military installations, no strategic value. It was purely a civilian settlement focused on education and cultural exchange. The colony's defensive systems consisted of nothing more than meteor shields and basic life support. The idea that it could threaten the mighty Galactic Empire was absurd, but that was exactly the point. Hansal realized the Empire was not responding to a military threat. They were responding to a different kind of danger. They were afraid of what humanity might become if allowed to develop freely. The massacre was designed to break humanity's spirit and remind them of their place in the galactic order. Captain Park's report continued. The adult population of Luna Colony was forced to watch. The Vorthan commander broadcast the attack on all communication channels. He wanted everyone to see what happened to species that grew too quickly. The surviving colonists are in shock. Many are catatonic. Several have attempted suicide. Hansal asked the question he dreaded most: what was the official explanation from the Vorthan command? Captain Park's expression grew even more hollow. The Vorthan fleet commander issued a statement claiming that Luna Colony was developing illegal weapons technology. He said the attack was a necessary police action to maintain galactic security. The lie was so transparent it was insulting. Human technology was constantly monitored by Empire observers. Every scientific advancement had to be approved by Vorthan oversight committees. The idea that children aged 10 to 16 were secretly building weapons was ridiculous, but the Empire did not care whether anyone believed their explanation. They only cared that everyone understood the message. And Saul spent the next several hours trying to reach other human colonies and Earth itself. The news was spreading rapidly, causing panic and grief across all human settlements. Some colonies were demanding immediate military protection. Others were calling for humanity to withdraw completely from galactic society. Earth's government was in emergency session, trying to decide how to respond. The reaction from other Empire species was mixed, and telling many sent formal condolences, but their messages were carefully worded to avoid any criticism of Vorthan actions. Several species that had seemed friendly to humanity suddenly became distant and formal. They were afraid that association with humans might make them targets as well, but some species reacted differently. The Kaleri, who resembled tall, graceful birds, sent a message of genuine outrage. Their representative declared that targeting children violated every civilized principle. The Thorgan Mining Confederation quietly offered to hide human refugees in their asteroid facilities. Several other species sent private messages Expressing sympathy and disgust, Saul realized that this was also part of the Empire's plan. The massacre would divide galactic opinion and isolate humanity politically. Species would have to choose between supporting the victims or appeasing the perpetrators. Most would choose their own safety over justice. Within 12 hours of the attack, Hansal received a formal summons to appear before the High Council. The message was delivered by a Vorthan courier who showed no emotion whatsoever. The courier handed Hansal an official document and left without saying a single word. The summons was scheduled for the following day at the height of the Council's daily session. This meant that Hansal's response to the massacre would be delivered in front of representatives from every major species in the Empire. The timing was deliberate. The Vorthans wanted maximum visibility for whatever lesson they planned to teach. Hansal spent the night preparing for what might be the most important speech of his life. He knew that his words would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future of his entire species. The Empire expected him to accept their explanation and ask for forgiveness. They expected him to beg for mercy and promise that humanity would be more compliant in the future. But as Hansal looked at the pictures of Earth's children that covered his walls, he felt something changing inside him. The diplomatic training that had taught him to find compromise and seek peaceful solutions seemed suddenly inadequate. Some acts were so evil that they could not be forgiven or forgotten. Some crimes demanded justice regardless of the cost. Hansal thought about the children who had died, their dreams and aspirations, their hopes for the future, their trust in the adults who had sent them to Luna Colony believing they would be safe. The Empire had murdered them not in the heat of battle, but as a calculated act of terrorism designed to crush human spirit. The ambassador also thought about what the attack revealed about the Empire's true nature. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that the Vorthans were practical rulers who preferred cooperation to violence. He had believed that the Empire's authoritarian structure was a necessary evil that maintained galactic peace, but the massacre showed that the Empire was built on fear, not cooperation. The peace Hansal had admired was simply the silence of the oppressed. The prosperity he had celebrated existed only as long as every species remained weak and divided. The moment any species showed signs of independence or strength, they became targets for elimination. As dawn broke over Nexus Prime, Hansal made his decision. He would not apologize for humanity's rapid advancement. He would not beg for mercy. He would not pretend that the massacre was justified. The Empire had made the choice to become humanity's enemy, and Hansal would make sure they understood the consequences. The ambassador put on his formal diplomatic uniform one last time. He pinned the Earth flag to his chest and walked toward the council chambers where he would deliver humanity's response to genocide. He had entered the Empire as a hopeful diplomat seeking cooperation and mutual benefit. He would leave as something else entirely. The 100,000 children of Luna Colony would be avenged. Ambassador Hansal Kim walked through the massive glass corridors of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime. The walls stretched high above him like crystal mountains, reaching toward alien stars. 3 suns burned in the purple sky outside, casting strange shadows that danced across the polished floors. Hansal had been living here for 3 years now, but the sight still took his breath away. The building itself was larger than most cities on Earth. Thousands of different alien species worked inside its endless halls. Some floated through the air on gossamer wings. Others rolled along on mechanical wheels that sparked against the floor. A few were so tall that Hansal had to crane his neck just to see their faces, while others were so small they rode on the shoulders of larger beings. Hansal remembered his first day here, when everything seemed impossible. The air smelled of ozone and strange flowers. The gravity felt wrong, making each step feel like he was walking on the moon. The sounds were overwhelming: clicks, whistles, roars, and musical tones that hurt his ears, but humans were good at adapting. That was what made them special in this vast galaxy. Today, Hansal was meeting with council member Veltar from the Zephian species. The Zephians looked like walking trees with silver bark and leaves that changed color with their moods. Right now, Veltar's leaves were a peaceful blue, which meant the alien was in a good mood. Hansal had learned to read these signs during his time here. The meeting room was comfortable by galactic standards, which meant it was freezing cold and filled with a gas that made Han Solo's eyes water, but he had learned not to complain. The Empire had been generous in allowing humanity to join at all. Most new species were simply conquered and enslaved. Humanity had been offered something unprecedented, a chance to prove themselves as equal. Han Solo sat across from Veltar at a table made from what looked like liquid metal. The surface rippled when he touched it. Veltar's leaves rustled as the alien spoke in the common galactic language that Han Solo had spent 2 years learning. Your species continues to impress the Council. Veltar said the agricultural improvements you suggested for the Kepler system have increased food production by 40%. The mining techniques your engineers developed have revolutionized operations on 17 worlds. Han Solo smiled, feeling proud of what humanity had accomplished. Earth scientists and engineers had always been creative, but being exposed to alien technology had sparked innovations nobody had imagined possible. Human doctors were now working alongside alien healers, creating new medical treatments. Human teachers were sharing Earth's educational methods with species across the galaxy, but Han Solo also sensed something else in Veltar's tone, a hint of worry that made the alien's leaves flicker between blue and yellow. Veltar continued speaking, but his voice was more careful now. Some council members have concerns about humanity's rapid advancement. Your species learns very quickly, perhaps too quickly. This was not the first time Han Solo had heard such warnings. The Galactic Empire had ruled for over 1,000 years by maintaining careful balance. No single species was allowed to become too powerful. Technology was shared slowly and only with permission. The Empire's leaders believed this system kept the galaxy stable and peaceful. Han Solo had studied the Empire's history during his first year on Nexus Prime. The Vorthan species had built this civilization through a combination of advanced technology and brutal efficiency. When they discovered a new species, they offered a simple choice: join the Empire as junior members or be destroyed. Most species chose survival. Vorthans were ancient beings who looked like walking crystals with glowing cores. Their leader, Overlord Dexmar, was over 300 years old and had personally overseen the conquest of thousands of worlds. He was known for being practical rather than cruel. He preferred cooperation to warfare, but he was absolutely ruthless when challenged. Han Solo had met Dexmar several times during formal ceremonies. The Overlord was always polite, but there was something cold in his crystal eyes, something that reminded Han Solo that humanity existed in the Empire only because the Vorthans allowed it. The unspoken message was clear: humans could thrive as long as they remembered their place. The Empire's structure was like a pyramid, with the Vorthans at the top and newer species at the bottom. Each species had specific roles to play. The warrior races provided soldiers, the intellectual races provided scientists, the industrial races provided workers. It was efficient, and it had brought peace to most of the galaxy, but it was also limiting. Humanity had been assigned the role of problem solvers. They were called upon when other species faced difficulties that traditional methods could not handle. Human creativity and adaptability made them valuable for solving complex challenges, but Han Solo sometimes wondered if this role was also a trap. If humans became too good at solving problems, they might start to question why those problems existed in the first place. During his 3 years on Nexus Prime, Han Solo had made friends among many species. He had learned their customs, shared their foods, and even attended their religious ceremonies. He genuinely believed that different species could work together for mutual benefit. The galaxy was vast enough for everyone to prosper if they cooperated. But he had also seen the Empire's darker side. Species that asked too many questions sometimes disappeared. Their representatives would simply stop attending council meetings and their worlds would be declared closed for administrative reasons. No one spoke about what happened to them, but everyone understood. The message in Saul's personal quarters were in the diplomatic section of the council building. His rooms were designed to accommodate human needs with Earth-normal gravity and atmosphere. He had decorated them with pictures from home, images of his family, and soul photographs of Earth's mountains and oceans, recordings of human musics. Sometimes late at night, when the alien sounds of Nexus Prime grew quiet, Han Solo would look at these reminders of home and wonder if he was doing the right thing. The Empire offered humanity safety and prosperity, In exchange for cooperation and obedience, most humans on Earth were happy with this arrangement. They were building new colonies, exploring new worlds, and learning technologies that seemed like magic, but Hansal had access to information that most humans did not see. He knew about the species that had been eliminated for growing too powerful. He knew about the surveillance systems that monitored every human colony. He knew about the secret protocols that would be activated if humanity ever showed signs of becoming a threat. Despite these concerns, Hansal continued his work. He attended council meetings, negotiated trade agreements, and represented humanity's interests as best he could. He told himself that the Empire was not perfect, but it was better than the chaos that had existed before. The galaxy was peaceful. Most species were prosperous. The system worked. Hansal also took comfort in humanity's unique position. Earth was far from the Empire's core worlds, which gave humans some freedom to develop on their own. Human colonies were growing rapidly, and human technology was advancing faster than anyone had expected. If problems arose in the future, humanity would not be helpless. As Hansal prepared for another day of diplomatic meetings, he looked out at the alien city sprawling beyond the council building. Millions of beings from thousands of species lived and worked together in relative harmony. It was an amazing achievement that showed what cooperation could accomplish. But he also noticed the Vorthan patrol ships floating silently above the city, reminders that this peace existed only because the Empire enforced. Hansal straightened his formal diplomatic robes and prepared to face another day of careful negotiations and polite conversations. He would smile and nod and work toward humanity's benefit within the Empire's rules. He would continue to believe that patience and diplomacy could secure a bright future for his species. He had no way of knowing that in just a few weeks everything would change forever.